Dexter Hawthorne, a millionaire renowned for his arrogance and cold demeanor, found himself at one of the most challenging points of his career. His company, once a symbol of success, was drowning in debt and losing investors by the day. To make matters worse, a critical business dinner loomed the next evening, a meeting that could decide the future of his empire. The one thing he needed to make the perfect impression: a fiancée. But there was a glaring issue. He didn't have one. Frustrated and hungry late at night, Dexter decided to order a pizza to distract himself from the chaos. When the doorbell echoed through the vast halls of his mansion, he strode to the door, expecting the usual: a disheveled delivery driver eager for a quick tip. Instead, he found Savannah Prescott, a Domino's delivery girl with a tired but genuine smile and a worn-out jacket that seemed 2 sizes too big. "You're late," Dexter snapped, his patience already running thin. "Well," Savannah replied, her tone sharp and unbothered, "maybe if your mansion didn't have more doors than a shopping mall, I could have found the right one faster." Her quick retort left Dexter momentarily stunned. He wasn't used to people talking back to him, let alone a pizza delivery girl. He narrowed his eyes, scanning her face as she handed him the box. There was something about her, her confidence, her defiance, that intrigued him. "What's your name?" Dexter asked, frowning as though piecing together a puzzle. "Savannah," she replied, crossing her arms, clearly suspicious. "Why?" Dexter paused, an idea starting to form in his mind, an idea so absurd it might just work. "Savannah, I need a favor." Savannah raised an eyebrow. "Look, my job is to deliver pizzas, not do favors for rich weirdos." A rare chuckle escaped Dexter. "It's a job," he clarified. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancée at a business dinner tomorrow night." For a moment, Savannah thought he was joking, but his serious expression said otherwise. She burst into laughter, shaking her head. "You're insane." "I'm not," Dexter replied, pulling out his wallet and flashing a thick stack of cash. "I'll pay you well." Savannah hesitated, her financial struggles flashing through her mind. Her rent was overdue, her debts were piling up, and this man was offering her a way out. "How much?" she asked cautiously. "Enough to change your life," Dexter said with a smirk. Savannah stared at the money, then at Dexter. This had to be the strangest proposition she'd ever received. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, I'm charging double." Dexter smiled faintly, pleased with her answer. "We have less than 24 hours to make you presentable." "Presentable?" Savannah repeated, narrowing her eyes. "You hired me to play fiancé, not become your doll." "I'm doing this for the money, not for a makeover." Dexter ignored her protest, gesturing for her to follow him inside. As Savannah stepped into the grand mansion, she couldn't help but feel like she had stepped into another world, a world where nothing was as it seemed. Savannah sat on the plush leather couch, feeling out of place among the marble floors and glistening chandeliers. Dexter paced back and forth, barking orders into his phone as though the world depended on every word. "Maribel," he snapped, "I need the best dresses. No, not just anything. Something elegant, something expensive. Yes, tonight." Savannah rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath, "Great, I'm being turned into Cinderella without the pumpkin." Dexter overheard and shot her a quick glance. "If you're going to do this, you have to look the part. My investors are sharp, and they'll tear us apart if we're not convincing." Savannah leaned back, crossing her arms. "You don't hire a pizza delivery girl for authenticity and then complain when she's, well, authentic." Dexter ignored her sarcasm, his focus entirely on controlling every detail. Moments later, the tall and impeccably dressed Maribel Sterling arrived, her arms full of garment bags. She glanced at Savannah, her nose wrinkling in barely disguised disapproval. "This is her?" Maribel asked, her tone dripping with judgment. "Yes, this is her," Dexter replied curtly. "She's perfect for the role." Maribel raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she approached Savannah, eyeing her up and down. "We'll need drastic work. Come with me." Savannah stood unimpressed. "Listen, Maribel," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm not a project, okay? I'm doing this for the money, not to play dress-up." Dexter stepped in before the tension escalated. "Just trust the process, Savannah. Maribel knows what she's doing." Hours later, Savannah found herself in a whirlwind of gowns, heels, and makeup brushes. Each dress felt more uncomfortable than the last, and Maribel's constant nitpicking didn't help. When Savannah finally saw her reflection, she hardly recognized herself. The girl in the mirror wasn't the tired delivery driver who barely made rent. She was elegant, polished, a woman who belonged in Dexter's world. Savannah walked downstairs, where Dexter waited by the fireplace. When he saw her, he froze. For the first time since their arrangement began, he looked genuinely impressed. "This will work," he said simply, his tone cool and detached. "Wow," Savannah replied with heavy sarcasm. "Thanks for making me feel like a new piece of office furniture." Dexter smirked, brushing off her attitude. "Now, let's go over the basics. We've been dating for 6 months. We met at an art gallery. You were admiring a painting, and I couldn't resist introducing myself. Got it?" "Art gallery?" Savannah snorted. "Do I look like someone who hangs out in art galleries?" Dexter crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "You do now. Stick to the story and smile as little as possible. My rivals will be there, and they'll do anything to trip us up." Savannah raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure this whole fake fiancé thing is the way to go? Why not just hire someone from one of those agencies?" Dexter hesitated, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "Because I need something real," he admitted. "Colton Winslow will be there, and he's the type to dig into every detail. If I show up with someone who feels rehearsed, he'll see through it immediately." Savannah shrugged. "Fine, but if I mess up, don't blame me." The next evening came faster than either of them expected. Savannah sat in the car, her nerves building as the driver pulled up to an opulent hotel. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, dressed to perfection, radiating wealth and power. Dexter turned to her, his expression serious. "Remember, Savannah, confidence is everything." "Confidence?" Savannah replied, trying to mask her anxiety. "I deliver pizzas for a living. How confident do you think I am in this crowd?" Dexter offered his arm as the driver opened the door. "Fake it." Savannah sighed, but took his arm anyway. As they entered the grand ballroom, all eyes turned to them. For the first time, Savannah realized how high the stakes were, not just for Dexter, but for her too. The grand ballroom was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft golden light across the room. Tables were adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, and every guest looked like they had stepped off the cover of a luxury magazine. Savannah felt out of place immediately, her hand clutching Dexter's arm a little tighter than she meant to. "Relax," Dexter whispered out of the corner of his mouth. "You're supposed to belong here." "Easy for you to say," Savannah muttered back. "You weren't cleaning marinara sauce off your shirt 2 days ago." Dexter gave her a quick look, but didn't respond. He led her toward a group of men and women who turned to greet him with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Dexter, great to see you." One of the men extended a firm handshake. "And this must be your fiancé." Savannah forced a smile, trying to remember the script. "Yes, I'm Savannah. It's nice to meet you." The man's sharp eyes flickered over her, and she could feel him assessing every detail. "So, Savannah, how did you and Dexter meet?" "At an art gallery," she replied smoothly, sticking to the story. "I was admiring a piece and Dexter, well, he struck up a conversation." "Of course he did," the man said, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. "And what do you do, Savannah?" Savannah hesitated for a split second, remembering Dexter's instructions. "I'm between jobs right now, but I've been working on some creative projects." "Creative projects?" Colton Winslow's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. He stepped forward, his smile charming but his eyes predatory. Dexter's always had an eye for unique personalities. "Tell me, Savannah, what kind of creative work do you do?" Savannah's stomach tightened, but she maintained her composure. "I dabble in photography," she said, improvising. "Mostly landscapes and urban settings." Colton chuckled lightly, clearly unconvinced, but not pressing further. "Interesting." Dexter stepped in, placing a protective hand on the small of her back. "Colton, don't interrogate my fiancée too much. You might scare her off." Colton raised his glass in a mock toast. "Wouldn't dream of it." Savannah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Dexter led her away toward another part of the room, where more guests awaited introductions. "You handled that well," Dexter murmured, his voice low. "Is this what rich people do for fun?" Savannah whispered back. "Try to out-suspicion each other." Dexter smirked, but before he could respond, a woman approached. Her striking features and perfectly tailored dress screamed confidence. Delilah Whitmore. "Dexter," she said with a smile that was more cutting than warm. "And who's this?" "This is Savannah, my fiancée," Dexter replied, his tone polite but guarded. Delilah's eyes lingered on Savannah for a moment too long. "Fiancée, huh? Well, Dexter, I have to say I'm surprised. You've never been the settling down type." "People change," Dexter replied smoothly. "Savannah has a way of bringing out the best in me." Delilah's smile didn't waver, but Savannah could sense the skepticism radiating off her. "Well, Savannah," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "you must be something special." "I think so," Savannah replied, her smile sharp. "Dexter's lucky to have me." Delilah's eyebrow twitched, and Savannah felt a small victory. Dexter gently tugged her arm, signaling it was time to move on. As they made their rounds, Savannah started to find her rhythm. She smiled when needed, stayed quiet when conversations got too intense, and leaned on Dexter's cues when the pressure rose. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that Colton and Delilah were watching her, waiting for her to slip. By the time they left the ballroom, Savannah's head was spinning. The car ride back to the mansion was quiet, the tension between her and Dexter thick. "I don't know how you do this," Savannah finally said, breaking the silence. "It's exhausting." Dexter glanced at her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. "It's not always like this." "Really?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because it sure seems like this is your life." He didn't answer, instead turning his gaze to the city lights outside the window. Savannah couldn't tell if he was hiding something or just didn't know how to explain. Either way, she knew one thing for certain. This charade was far from over. The next morning, Savannah sat in the vast mansion's sunlit garden, her thoughts tangled like the vines climbing the trellis nearby. She sipped her coffee slowly, still replaying the previous night in her head. For someone who claimed to live a life of control, Dexter's world seemed anything but stable, and yet here she was, smack in the middle of it. "Enjoying the view?" Dexter's voice broke her train of thought. She looked up to see him standing nearby, his suit jacket draped casually over one shoulder. "Not as much as you probably think," she shot back, smirking. "What's on today's agenda? More pretending, more stares from people like Delilah?" Dexter didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat across from her. We have another event this weekend. It's a charity gala. Bigger crowd, more questions. Savannah groaned, setting her coffee down. I thought this was a one-night gig. You never said anything about a sequel. I made it clear it wouldn't be over quickly, Dexter said firmly, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. If you're having second thoughts... Second thoughts, she interrupted. I'm practically drowning in them. But no, I'm not backing out. I need the money. Dexter leaned back, studying her. Then we need to make this believable. That means spending time together outside these events. People will start digging if they don't see us acting like a real couple. Savannah blinked. Wait, are you saying we're going on a date? Call it what you want, Dexter replied, a faint smirk playing on his lips. It's necessary. By late afternoon, Savannah found herself in Dexter's car again, this time heading into the city. She had no idea where they were going, and Dexter offered no hints. Instead, he drove in silence, his focus on the road as though every turn required deep contemplation. Are you always this talkative? Savannah quipped, trying to lighten the mood. Dexter glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. Sometimes silence is better. Or maybe you just don't know how to talk to people who aren't trying to impress you, she shot back. His smirk faded, replaced by something almost vulnerable. Maybe, he admitted softly, catching her off guard. The car pulled up to a quiet park overlooking a lake. The scene was picturesque, with weeping willows lining the water's edge and a faint breeze rippling through the leaves. Savannah stepped out of the car, inhaling the fresh air. A park? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Not exactly what I expected. Sometimes simplicity is what works, Dexter replied, walking toward a bench near the water. Savannah followed, her curiosity piqued. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sunlight dance on the lake's surface. Finally, Savannah turned to him. Why are you really doing all this, Dexter? I mean, I know it's to save your company, but it feels like there's more to it. Dexter hesitated, his jaw tightening. My company is all I have, he said finally, his voice low. I've worked my entire life to build it. Losing it, I wouldn't know who I am without it. No family, no friends, Savannah asked gently, sensing there was more beneath his polished exterior. My family is distant, he admitted, and friends, well, they're hard to come by in my world. Savannah studied him, seeing a side of Dexter she hadn't expected. For a moment, he didn't seem like the arrogant millionaire she met at his front door. He seemed human, flawed, lonely. And you? Dexter asked suddenly, turning the conversation back on her. Why did you agree to this? Besides the money, Savannah shrugged, looking back at the lake. Because I needed to get out of my own life for a while. Delivering pizzas wasn't exactly my dream job, you know? Dexter nodded, but he didn't press further. They sat there for a while longer, the silence between them no longer awkward but oddly comfortable. By the time they returned to the mansion, the mood had shifted. Savannah couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something felt different. As they stepped inside, Maribel appeared, her arms full of fabric swatches and a measuring tape slung over her shoulder. Mr. Hawthorne, we need to finalize the details for the gala, she said briskly before turning to Savannah. And you, dear, need to look perfect. Again. Savannah rolled her eyes, but followed Maribel upstairs without protest. As she tried on yet another series of gowns, she found herself wondering why she was starting to care about Dexter's approval. It was all fake, wasn't it? A transaction, nothing more. Yet as she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, wearing an elegant dress and standing in a room she never imagined entering, she couldn't shake the thought, maybe this wasn't just about pretending anymore. The charity gala was held in one of the city's most exclusive venues. The building itself, looked like a palace, with grand arches and gilded details that screamed wealth and power. Savannah sat in the car, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, her nerves creeping in again. "Stop that," Dexter said without looking at her. "You'll wrinkle the fabric." Savannah glared at him. "Oh, sorry, Your Highness. Didn't realize this dress was the star of the night." Dexter smirked but didn't respond. Instead, he reached over and adjusted her necklace, a delicate piece that sparkled under the car's interior light. His fingers brushed her collarbone for the briefest moment, and Savannah felt her breath hitch. "There," he said, pulling back. "Perfect." Before she could reply, the driver opened the door and Dexter stepped out, extending a hand to help her. The flash of cameras greeted them immediately. Savannah's grip on Dexter's arm tightened as he led her up the steps, his confidence unwavering. "Remember," he whispered, "smile, nod, and let me handle the talking." "Got it," she whispered back. "Fake fiancé? Stay quiet, look pretty." Dexter glanced at her with a faint grin. "Exactly." Inside, the gala was even more extravagant than Savannah had imagined. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, live music filled the air, and servers in tuxedos weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Dexter moved with ease, greeting guests and exchanging pleasantries as if he'd been born for this. Savannah, on the other hand, felt like a deer in headlights. "Dexter, over here!" a familiar voice called out, and Savannah's stomach dropped. It was Colton Winslow. Colton approached with his usual charming grin, but his eyes darted to Savannah almost immediately. "Savannah," he said smoothly, taking her hand and kissing it lightly. "Lovely to see you again. I have to admit you clean up nicely." "Thanks," Savannah replied, forcing a polite smile. "And you look exactly the same." Dexter stifled a laugh, but Colton seemed unfazed. "So how's life with Mr. Hawthorne, adjusting to his unique ways?" Savannah tilted her head, a playful smirk forming. "It's an adventure, that's for sure. Never a dull moment." Colton chuckled, clearly enjoying the banter, but Savannah could feel the undertone of his words. He was testing her, probing for cracks in the story. She glanced at Dexter, who was watching the exchange with careful eyes. "Speaking of adventures," Colton said, his tone light but sharp, "how did you two meet again? Was it an art gallery?" Savannah felt her pulse quicken but kept her smile steady. "That's right. I was admiring a painting and Dexter struck up a conversation." "Dexter, the art enthusiast," Colton mused, his grin widening. "I didn't know you had a taste for anything beyond numbers." Dexter's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I've always appreciated art, Colton. You'd know that if you paid attention to anything outside of your own reflection." Savannah bit back a laugh as Colton's expression briefly faltered. Before he could respond, Delilah Whitmore appeared, her entrance as calculated as a model on a runway. "Dexter," she purred, her gaze flickering to Savannah. "And Savannah, how lovely to see you again." Savannah braced herself for whatever cutting remark Delilah had prepared, but the woman surprised her by turning to Colton instead. "Shouldn't you be mingling, Colton? You don't want to miss your chance to impress the board members." Colton hesitated, but eventually excused himself, leaving the three of them alone. Delilah's smile didn't waver as she turned her full attention to Savannah. "So, Savannah," she began, her tone dripping with faux warmth, "you must be thrilled to be part of Dexter's world. It's quite the leap from, what was it again? Photography?" Savannah met Delilah's gaze head-on. "It's been an adjustment," she replied smoothly, "but I've always been good at adapting." Delilah's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but before she could respond, Dexter intervened. "Delilah, shouldn't you be checking on the auction? I heard they needed help organizing the bids." Delilah's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. With a final glance at Savannah, she walked off, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Nicely done," Dexter murmured to Savannah once they were alone. "You're starting to get the hang of this." "Yeah, well, your friends make it easy," Savannah quipped. "They're all so welcoming." Dexter smirked. "You handled Colton and Delilah perfectly, but keep your guard up. They're not done trying to dig." As the night went on, Savannah found herself surprisingly comfortable in her role. She chatted with guests, laughed at Dexter's carefully placed jokes, and even managed to fend off a few more probing questions. But underneath it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that this world wasn't just foreign to her, it was dangerous. By the time they left the gala, Savannah was emotionally drained. The ride back to the mansion was quiet, the weight of the evening settling over both of them. "Why do they hate you so much?" Savannah asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Dexter sighed, his gaze fixed out the window. "Because they want what I have, and if they can't take it, they'll destroy it." "And you think I can help stop them?" Savannah asked, her voice softer now. "I think you already are," Dexter replied, his tone serious, "but this isn't over yet." The morning after the gala, Savannah woke up to the sound of muffled voices echoing through the mansion. She groggily made her way downstairs and found Maribel pacing in the foyer, her phone pressed to her ear and an armful of fabric swatches in hand. "More changes? We don't have time for this." Maribel snapped into the phone, clearly frustrated. "Fine, I'll handle it." Savannah leaned against the wall, watching the scene unfold. It was like stepping into a soap opera. Before she could retreat unnoticed, Dexter's voice called out behind her, "Savannah, we need to talk." She turned to see him standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, his tie already perfectly knotted despite the early hour. His expression was serious, and that was never a good sign. "What now?" she asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "There's another event tonight," Dexter said, motioning for her to follow him into his office. "This one's different. It's more private, but the stakes are higher." "Higher than last night?" Savannah asked incredulously, stepping into the sleek, modern office. "How many more of these things do you have lined up?" Dexter closed the door behind them and leaned against his desk. "This isn't just about impressing investors anymore. Colton is digging. I found out this morning that he's been asking questions about you, where you're from, what you do, everything." Savannah felt her stomach twist. "And what happens when he finds out the truth?" "That's why we need to stay ahead of him," Dexter replied. "I've already arranged for Maribel to smooth over any inconsistencies. From now on, every move we make has to be airtight." Savannah crossed her arms, her frustration boiling over. "Do you even hear yourself? You're treating me like one of your business deals. This isn't my life, Dexter. I'm just here because you paid me." Dexter's expression softened, a rare crack in his usually impenetrable facade. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this complicated." Savannah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Fine. One more event. But after that, we need to talk about where this is going. I'm not a pawn in your game." Dexter nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "Agreed." That evening, Savannah found herself in yet another extravagant gown, her makeup flawless thanks to Maribel's relentless efforts. She stood at the edge of a smaller, more intimate ballroom, watching as Dexter mingled with a select group of guests. Unlike the charity gala, this event felt heavier, more serious. The conversations were quieter, but the stakes were palpable. Savannah sipped her champagne, trying to blend in, when she noticed Delilah approaching. The woman's smile was as sharp as ever, and Savannah braced herself for another verbal sparring match. "You've really embraced this world, haven't you?" Delilah said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I adapt quickly," Savannah replied smoothly, refusing to rise to the bait. Delilah's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile didn't falter. You must really love Dexter to put up with all of this. Savannah met her gaze, her pulse quickening. Of course I do. Why else would I be here? Oh, I don't know, Delilah said, taking a sip of her drink. People have all sorts of motives. Before Savannah could respond, Dexter appeared at her side, his hand resting lightly on her back. Delilah, he said coolly, enjoying yourself? Always, Delilah replied, her smile turning sweet. And you two look positively radiant tonight. Almost too perfect. Some things just fall into place, Dexter said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Delilah lingered for a moment longer before finally walking away. As soon as she was out of earshot, Savannah exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She's relentless, Savannah muttered. She's also dangerous, Dexter said, his voice low. Don't underestimate her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversations and careful smiles. Savannah found herself growing more adept at playing the role of Dexter's fiancée, but with every interaction, the line between real and fake blurred a little more. By the time they returned to the mansion, the weight of the evening had taken its toll. Savannah kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch, rubbing her temples. "This is insane," she said, looking at Dexter. "Your life is insane." Dexter sat across from her, his tie loosened for the first time that night. "It's not always like this." "Really?" Savannah shot back. "Because it sure seems like it is." Dexter hesitated, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're right," he admitted. "But it's all I know. And for what it's worth, you're handling it better than most people would." Savannah looked at him, caught off guard by his sincerity. That almost sounded like a compliment. "Maybe it was," Dexter said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For a moment, the tension between them dissolved, replaced by something neither of them could quite define. But Savannah knew one thing for certain. Whatever this was, it was far from over. The morning after the private event, the mansion was unusually quiet. Savannah wandered into the kitchen, hoping for a peaceful cup of coffee, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. She found Dexter at the dining table, surrounded by papers and his laptop, his expression more serious than usual. "What's going on?" she asked, grabbing a mug from the counter. Dexter didn't look up. "Colton's stepped up his game. He's digging deeper into both of us." Savannah sat across from him, her coffee forgotten. "And what's he found?" "Nothing yet," Dexter said, finally meeting her gaze. "But it's only a matter of time before he connects the dots." Savannah felt her stomach drop. "So what do we do?" Dexter leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "We make a move before he does. Tonight, there's a dinner with key investors. It's the perfect chance to show them we're solid." Savannah sighed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Another event? Dexter, I don't know how much more of this I can take." He stood, walking around the table to stand beside her. "I know this is asking a lot, but we're so close. If we pull this off, Colton won't have a leg to stand on." Savannah looked up at him, her resolve wavering. She hated the chaos of his world, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, toward helping him succeed. "Fine," she said finally, "but this better be the last one." Dexter gave her a faint smile. "Thank you." That evening, Savannah found herself once again donning an elegant gown, her hair styled to perfection by Maribel's expert hands. As the car pulled up to the restaurant, she glanced at Dexter, her nerves evident. "You look amazing," he said softly, his usual cool demeanor replaced by something warmer. "Don't get used to it," Savannah replied with a small smile, trying to mask her anxiety. Inside, the restaurant was bustling with activity. The dining room was reserved for Dexter's group, a mix of investors, board members, and, of course, Colton. Savannah spotted him immediately, his confident smile making her stomach churn. "Savannah," Colton greeted her as they approached the table. "Lovely to see you again. You're becoming quite the socialite." "Thanks," Savannah replied with a polite smile, determined not to let him rattle her. "I'm just following Dexter's lead." Colton chuckled, but there was a sharpness in his gaze that made Savannah uneasy. As the dinner progressed, she did her best to stick to the script, answering questions with Dexter's carefully crafted responses. But Colton wasn't the only one watching her closely. Delilah Whitmore sat a few seats down, her piercing eyes fixed on Savannah like a predator studying its prey. Midway through the meal, Colton raised his glass for a toast. "To Dexter and Savannah," he said, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "May their partnership be as successful as their engagement." Savannah forced a smile, raising her glass. Dexter, ever composed, responded with a cool nod. But the tension at the table was palpable, and Savannah couldn't shake the feeling that Colton was laying a trap. After dinner, Colton approached them as they stood by the exit, waiting for their car. "Dexter, a word?" he asked, his tone casual but firm. Dexter glanced at Savannah. "Go ahead to the car. I'll be right there." Savannah hesitated, her instincts telling her not to leave, but she nodded and walked outside. From the corner of her eye, she could see Colton leaning in close to Dexter, his expression smug. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't good. When Dexter joined her in the car a few minutes later, his jaw was tight and his hands clenched into fists. Savannah didn't press him, but the silence between them was heavy. Back at the mansion, Dexter finally spoke. "Colton knows," he said, his voice low. Savannah's heart sank. "Knows what?" "That you're not who you say you are," Dexter replied, his eyes meeting hers. "He doesn't have proof yet, but he's close." Savannah felt a mix of fear and anger rising in her chest. "So what happens now?" "We fight back," Dexter said firmly. "If Colton wants a war, we'll give him one." The tension in the mansion was electric. Dexter spent the next day on endless calls with his legal team, strategists, and even Maribel, who now had the unenviable task of spinning Savannah's backstory into something bulletproof. Savannah, meanwhile, felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She wasn't just pretending anymore, she was a liability in Dexter's high-stakes world. That evening, as the final preparations for their countermove unfolded, Dexter found Savannah sitting in the library, flipping through a book without actually reading it. "You're quiet," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Savannah looked up, her expression tired. "What do you expect? Colton's about to expose me and your entire plan might go up in flames." Dexter walked over, sitting across from her. "Colton doesn't scare me," he said firmly. "People like him thrive on intimidation. If we stay ahead of him, he won't win." Savannah closed the book, setting it on the table. "It's easy for you to say. You're used to this. Me? I'm just a pizza delivery girl who got caught up in your mess." "You're more than that," Dexter said, surprising her. "You've handled yourself better than most people I know. Don't let Colton make you doubt that." His words struck something deep within her, but before she could respond, Maribel appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "It's time," she said briskly. "The investors are gathering." Dexter stood, offering Savannah his hand. "Let's finish this." The event was held in a sleek, modern conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. This wasn't a party or a gala, this was business. The room buzzed with tension as investors mingled, their sharp eyes taking in every detail. Dexter and Savannah entered together, their entrance turning heads. She felt his hand on the small of her back, a steadying presence as they made their way to the front of the room. Colton was already there, his smug smile betraying his confidence. "Dexter," Colton greeted, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "Savannah, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," Dexter replied coolly, guiding Savannah to a seat beside him. As the presentation began, Dexter laid out his plans for the company's future with the precision and confidence of a man who had everything under control. Savannah marveled at how easily he commanded the room, his voice steady and persuasive. But she could feel Colton's gaze on her, and it sent a chill down her spine. When Dexter finished, the room erupted in applause. He turned to Savannah, giving her a small nod. "Your turn." Savannah's stomach dropped. "What?" "Trust me," Dexter whispered. "You've got this." She stood slowly, her heart pounding as she approached the podium. Colton leaned back in his chair, his expression one of amused anticipation. Savannah gripped the edges of the podium, forcing herself to meet the crowd's gaze. "When I met Dexter," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach, "I had no idea how much my life would change. At first I thought this was just a partnership, a way to help each other out. But it's become more than that. I've seen firsthand how much Dexter cares about this company, about his people, and about the future he's building." She glanced at Dexter, who gave her an encouraging nod. "This isn't just a business, it's a reflection of who he is, and I'm proud to stand by his side, both personally and professionally." The room was silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Savannah felt her cheeks flush as she stepped down, returning to her seat beside Dexter. "You were perfect," he whispered, his voice full of pride. Colton, however, wasn't done. He stood, clearing his throat. "Well said, Savannah. But I'm curious. What's your take on the logistics side of things? After all, as Dexter's fiancée, you must have some insight." Savannah froze, but Dexter didn't miss a beat. "She doesn't handle logistics, Colton. That's why I have a team. Perhaps you should consider hiring one." The jab drew chuckles from the room, and Colton's smirk faltered. Savannah exhaled, the tension easing slightly. Back at the mansion later that night, Dexter poured himself a drink, the exhaustion evident in his posture. Savannah joined him in the living room, sinking into the couch. "That was intense," she said, running a hand through her hair. "You handled it like a pro," Dexter replied, raising his glass. "I couldn't have done this without you." Savannah smiled faintly, her walls lowering for the first time in days. "So, does this mean it's over?" "Not yet," Dexter admitted. "Colton won't stop until he's out of options. But tonight, we won." Savannah nodded, a small sense of accomplishment warming her chest. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged, not just in Dexter's world, but by his side. The next morning, the calm after the storm didn't last long. Savannah woke to the sound of raised voices coming from the hallway. She threw on a robe and peeked out the door, only to see Dexter standing face to face with Colton Winslow in the mansion's grand entryway. "Is this your last desperate attempt?" Dexter's voice was icy, but his posture radiated control. Colton, ever smug, smirked. "Just here to deliver the truth, Dexter. You can't keep playing this game forever." "What do you want, Colton?" Dexter asked, his patience clearly thin. "I want you out," Colton said, his voice sharp. "Your company, your reputation, everything, it's only a matter of time before it all falls apart." Savannah stepped into the hallway, unable to hold back any longer. "What's your problem, Colton?" she asked, her tone firm. "You've been circling like a vulture since this started. Why don't you just back off?" Colton turned to her, his expression bemused. "Ah, Savannah, always so feisty. Tell me, how does it feel living a lie, playing dress-up in Dexter's little fantasy world?" Savannah felt her cheeks burn, but she refused to back down. "You think you're exposing some big secret, but you're just bitter. Bitter because Dexter outshines you in every way." Colton's smirk faltered, and Dexter stepped between them, his voice low and threatening. "Get out of my house, Colton. Now. For a moment it seemed like Colton would push further, but he eventually turned on his heel and strode toward the door. "This isn't over," he said over his shoulder, "not by a long shot." When the door slammed shut behind him, the tension lingered in the air. Savannah turned to Dexter, her frustration boiling over. "How does he even have this much power over you?" Dexter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Colton's been gunning for my position for years. He thrives on tearing people down, but I won't let him win." Savannah crossed her arms, her voice softer now. "You're putting so much on the line, Dexter. Your company, your reputation, even me." Dexter's eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask of the composed businessman fell away. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I dragged you into this without thinking about the consequences for you." Savannah hesitated, the vulnerability in his voice catching her off guard. "It's not just about me," she said. "It's about you too. You've been fighting this battle alone for so long, and I can see what it's doing to you." Dexter looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't know any other way," he admitted. Savannah stepped closer, her voice firm but kind. "Maybe it's time to let someone help you. Not just as a business partner, but as a real partner." Dexter turned back to her, something unspoken passing between them. "Savannah, I don't just want your help. I need it." Before she could respond, Maribel burst into the room, her face pale. "Dexter, there's something you need to see." She handed him a tablet, and Savannah leaned over his shoulder as he scanned the screen. It was an email leak, messages between Colton and a few investors. He was trying to bribe them into pulling out of Dexter's company. "Unbelievable," Dexter muttered, his jaw tightening. Savannah frowned. "Can't we use this against him?" "We can," Dexter said, a small smile forming. "And we will." That evening, Dexter and Savannah sat in his office, plotting their next move. Savannah was amazed by his determination, his ability to strategize even under immense pressure. For the first time, she felt like they were truly working as a team. "You're a lot tougher than you look," Dexter said, glancing at her. Savannah smirked. "And you're a lot more human than I thought." Dexter chuckled, a rare sound that made Savannah's heart skip. "We're not so different, you and I. Except you're a millionaire and I'm not," she quipped. "Not yet," Dexter replied, his smirk returning. As the night wore on, they finalized their plan to counter Colton's sabotage. Dexter would confront him directly at a board meeting the following day, armed with evidence of his underhanded dealings. Savannah would stand by his side, not just as his fake fiancée, but as his ally. As they wrapped up, Savannah leaned back in her chair, exhaustion setting in. "Do you think this will work?" Dexter nodded, his expression confident. "It has to." Savannah smiled faintly, a sense of hope warming her chest. For the first time, she felt like they were fighting for something real. The next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Dexter dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his usual composed demeanor sharper than ever. Savannah stood nearby, her nerves hidden behind a polished exterior she had perfected over the past few weeks. "This is it," Dexter said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "We end this today." Savannah nodded, her resolve matching his. "Let's take him down." The boardroom was filled with the sharp aroma of coffee and the hum of whispered conversations. Investors sat around the massive table, their eyes flickering between Dexter and Colton, who sat at opposite ends like two rivals preparing for battle. Dexter stood first, commanding the room's attention. "Before we begin, I'd like to address the recent rumors circulating about me and my fiancée, Savannah." Savannah felt her pulse quicken as all eyes turned to her. She forced a calm smile, hoping she looked more confident than she felt. "These rumors," Dexter continued, are the work of someone who is desperate to undermine my reputation and this company. But today, I'm here to set the record straight. He tapped on the table, and a screen lit up with the leaked emails Maribel had uncovered. Gasps rippled through the room as Dexter scrolled through the incriminating messages, each one exposing Colton's attempts to bribe investors and spread false information. Colton Winslow, Dexter said, his voice sharp as a blade, has been working behind the scenes to sabotage not only my business, but the trust we've built over the years. These emails are just the beginning. Colton stood abruptly, his face flushed. This is absurd. These could be fake. Dexter cut him off. They've already been verified. Your game is over, Colton. The room fell silent, all eyes now on Colton. The smug confidence he carried for so long had crumbled, leaving him exposed. One by one, the investors began murmuring among themselves, their trust in Dexter visibly restored. You've had your chance to speak, Dexter said firmly. Now it's my turn. He turned to Savannah, gesturing for her to stand. Savannah isn't just my fiancée. She's someone who has stood by me through one of the most challenging times of my life. She's shown me what it means to fight for something real, and I wouldn't be here today without her. Savannah felt a lump in her throat as Dexter spoke. For the first time, his words didn't feel rehearsed or calculated. They felt genuine. The room erupted in applause, the board's approval sealing Colton's fate. Dexter sat down, his expression a mix of relief and triumph. Savannah leaned toward him, whispering, "That was incredible." He turned to her, his smirk returning. "It's not over yet." Back at the mansion, the mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. Savannah sat on the terrace, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Dexter joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "To victory," he said, handing her a glass. "To survival," Savannah replied, clinking her glass against his. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Dexter spoke. "I meant what I said in the boardroom. About you." Savannah looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "Dexter?" "This started as a business arrangement," he continued, his voice softer now. "But somewhere along the way, it became more. You've shown me that I don't have to do this alone, that I don't want to." Savannah felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Are you saying the fake fiancé gig is over?" Dexter chuckled. "I'm saying I want to make it real, if you'll have me." She stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, but through it all, they had found something neither of them expected: each other. "I think," she said, setting her glass down, "you're going to have to propose properly." Dexter stood, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I thought you'd never ask." He knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring. "Savannah Prescott, will you stay by my side? For real this time?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, unable to find the words. Dexter slipped the ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to fade away as he pulled her into a tight embrace. As they stood on the terrace, the future felt brighter than ever. For the first time, Savannah wasn't just a part of Dexter's world. She was his partner in it. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, True Impressive Stories, where we bring you incredible tales of love, drama, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us, what would you do in Savannah's shoes? Don't miss our next story coming soon.